Ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much for joining us. We are live on this lovely rainy day, May 17th, 2021. My name is Sean Phillips. Today I am joined live with my two co-hosts, Mr. Andy Van Beber, Travis Kirkendall. We are the Voice of Reason podcast, and today we have a very special guest, Andy's old friend, Matthew Eddleman. I hope I've got that last name right. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. How are you all doing today?
Great.
Very good. Very good.
Excited for this one.
Yes, we've already discussed pre-show that we're not going to make any unneeded comments about anything about anyone at any time.
Andy's referring to talking about genitalia, and we'll get into that later, believe it or not. But we do have a very excellent show planned for you guys. We do have two, not one, but two we'll say pastors. I know Andy's done some youth pastor work in his time. You have the two problem children, and thank God we left out the Catholic priest, because we are going to have a good time tonight and not have to have any pending investigations following afterwards.
So say you.
Well, first and foremost, true. How was everyone's weekend? Did anybody do anything fun?
Well, there was no projectile vomiting this weekend. That was good.
Oh yeah, you had that flu. That was it last week?
Yeah, it was last weekend. Yes.
Before?
Yeah, you know. So
Matt, how about you? Anything fun for you this weekend?
I started off with a little bit of landscaping, which I thought would take about 4 hours. Took 2 days, and as things progressed, the plan starts this way, and then it just gets bigger and bigger. But it looks great.
Oh yeah.
That's
good. That's all that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give a little intro.
Good.
My friend, this is Matt Eddleman. This is a college buddy of mine from my Hannibal LaGrange days. Matt is a chaplain at what hospital is it, Matt?
It's called Norton Audubon Hospital in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yeah, and so how long have you been doing that for now?
Been a chaplain in various hospitals for 17 years now. I can't believe it.
Wow. And Matt, I want to make him famous because, guys, I've always known this. Matt has been one of my closest friends for a long time, and one of the reasons why we asked him on tonight is Matt's never been afraid to call me out, and we have one of those unique friendships where we call each other out on stuff all the time, and we've been there for each other in our highs and our lows times. Matt and I both have been through divorce, and we've kind of carried each other through those times. And Matt has also called me a jerk in the times when I've needed to be called a jerk, and that's okay because that's why I love him and everything. But I wanted to make him famous.
So is this like I now pronounce you Chuck and Larry?
Yes, it is. It is. It is. But I've also said I wanted to make Matt famous for another reasons, because this man is a comedic genius. I've always said so. One of the reasons why I say that, and I'm going to go ahead and bring this up here if I can. You guys will probably see. I'll unplug my headphones so you guys can hear it at home. But I'll bring the video up. This is we'll just play it, and then Matt, you can defend yourself later. How's that?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, let's see if I can get this to work now. All right.
Hey guys, another one of Matthew's marriage tips, Mother's Day edition. What is it that all mothers ultimately want on Mother's Day? Is it the card, or the flowers, or to be taken out to dinner? No, it's actually none of those things. What mothers ultimately want on Mother's Day is to be acknowledged for all of the work that they do. So the best thing, guys, that you can do for the mother in your life is to give her plenty to do on Mother's Day. You'll see, for instance, that here at the house, I have done a number of things. There are vegetables here on the kitchen counter that I've left. These need to be washed and put away. However, they can't be washed just yet because there's a kitchen sink full of dishes that also need to be put away. On top of that, guys, I've been very thoughtful and have not taken out the trash because I know that on Mother's Day that's something she would want to do. But on top of that, I'm even more thoughtful and that the recycling also has to be put away. Guys, she will appreciate your creativity and desire to just let her do the things that she always does. She's going to love this. And so what you ought to do today is just sit back and relax and just let her do what she would normally do during the day. You'll see that I've left my shoes here on the kitchen floor, and she just wants to be acknowledged for the work that You're doing great, babe. You're doing great. I really appreciate it. She's going to be on her feet till about 9:30, 10 o'clock tonight, just doing things around the house. And it's going to be amazing to see. So, fellas, what you want to do is just sit back and relax. Let your wife do all the work around the house, but make sure that you acknowledge that she has a lot to do and that you've left her a lot to do. Trust me on this, fellas. She's going to go wild.
Ladies and gentlemen, that to me is that's just gold right there.
Yeah, I don't know if how many of our listeners here tonight are in relationships, but I feel like from time to time I put out videos that really help encourage the growth of a relationship and really spark some new pioneering ways to continue to work on it. I told I said, when you come to bed later tonight, it's going to be 10 o'clock because I'm going to be asleep. But if you come into bed, and please try to just slide in carefully so I don't wake up. But if you do wake me up, if you're lucky, that's when I'll put the moves on you. If you're working all day long.
Oh my God.
And we're going to finish off Mother's Day. I'm going to put the moves on her.
Oh my gosh.
If I wake up.
Oh my God.
So
You're doing her a favor.
You're doing her.
Thank you.
Yes.
You.
Oh my God.
I'm thinking of her.
Yeah, you are.
I'm thinking of her in this. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. See, this is what I've got to put up with for so long, and but anyway, that I just wanted to share that with. Yeah, follow him there, Matt Eddleman on Facebook. Yeah, look him up. Look up some of those great videos. Mm-hmm. There's some great ones on there. But anyway,
they're gold. They're golden.
Oh, Sean, you're going to be there soon. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Hey, I was literally just going to take this and roll with it tomorrow. I was going to give Tony her own little mini Mother's Day tomorrow, just with all that advice, and I'm going to see how it goes. I'm sure it'll be super, super awesome, actually. Yeah.
It'll be memorable.
Absolutely. One way or the other.
Make sure you film it. I want to see this.
Yeah, I do too. So.
Hey, I actually value my life.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know. She might be tiny, but
she can kick your butt. She can kick your butt.
She could.
I was going to ask Matt, lead into this next thing. Since you're down there in Kentucky, are you guys seeing anything of this shortage, or are you guys having any on gasoline or anything like that, or are you guys seeing any of that?
Yeah, no. Yeah, people have been filling up. In fact, I went to the gas station. There was a gas station about 2 blocks down the street, and on Saturday, I think I was there, and they had signs that they were out of unleaded gas. You could get some of the other higher octanes, but the 87 octane that I usually get, all the pumps, they were completely out.
Wow.
Which is pretty dumb here in Kentucky, because that pipeline that was had that, what is it, a ransom attack or a cyber attack?
Right.
It doesn't serve Kentucky. So Kentucky wasn't affected by that, but people were still freaking out about it and getting gas.
Well, I wanted to share this. I guess you guys have, you guys won't be able to see it, but our viewers will be able to see this. This was a tweet from the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission. This was 5/12, if you guys can see there on the tweet. And it says, do not fill plastic bags with gasoline. Use only containers approved for fuel. And so this was the story. It said and this was from CBS on this was today. So this is today. It says officials are warning people not to pour gasoline into plastic bags amid panic over shortage of gas in southwestern states. The shortage comes after a massive hack of, like you said, Matt, the Colonial Pipeline, which supplies about 45% of the East Coast total fuel, by a Russian-based criminal group. And then it said, There was one. It said at least 2 tweets: a photo of a car trunk holding clear plastic bags filled with gasoline, and a video of a woman pouring gas into a plastic bag. While some posts were found by Snopes to be several years old, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission nevertheless posted a flurry of tweets advising people not to carry gasoline in plastic bags or other containers not approved to carry fuel. And then one of my former students' dad is a truck driver, and you guys again aren't going to be able to see this, but you need to look on your phone. So this is a photo that he got from somebody, and this is a woman trying to put gasoline in a laundry basket. So, I mean, that's just that's pure genius. But was it last year was toilet paper, and this year's gasoline, and I don't know what people are I saw, I've seen photos of people doing all this, just getting, gasoline. I have seen, people, the videos on the news of people getting having 10, 12 of those gallon gas cans in the back of their car, and they're filling it up. I'm like, okay, what are you going to do with that now? Are you going to are you going to sell that? What are you planning on doing with that?
I've heard of some people doing that.
Well, I was
reading something about it. I don't know.
Well, gas is, so here in Pittsfield, gas is $3.19. Across the river over in Louisiana is $2.79. And of course, you guys up in Chicago see what, $4 gas all the time anyway, don't you, Travis?
Unleaded right now is, for me, it's like $3.41 I just paid.
Wow.
Which could be worse,
Yeah.
I drive a Chevy Cruze, so I get away with good gas mileage, but it still sucks.
Yeah.
It used to cost me $20 to fill up my car. Now it costs $36, $37 from empty.
Yeah.
It's quite a difference.
Yeah.
God, you never would have thought that in 2021, the PlayStation 5 would actually be easier to obtain than unleaded gasoline in a couple of these states all across. Like, people are now going back to OnlyFans just to be able to fill up their car, and I respect it. You know what? We just got a minivan too, so.
Oh yeah, you did get the minivan. Yeah, good luck.
I'm probably gonna have to start uploading.
You got to fill the plastic bags, obviously. Throw those in the back. Throw them in the back with Julian.
Well, what is it about? I still to this day don't understand what the thing was with the toilet paper.
Here's the thing. I don't think anybody cared that much about the cleanliness of their ass until it became apparent that this might be it. I remember when COVID struck, it was Lysol and toilet paper.
Right.
Oh,
right.
yeah.
All right.
Right.
Now, I've been around the block, a few times, been to some pretty interesting places in my life where those two things would most definitely be a necessity in copious amounts of them. With that said, yeah, I never, to this day, I'm sure that there's some people that are still rolling with the toilet paper that they had. It was so bad, that when the toilet paper that's available at Walmart is worse than the Skillcraft toilet paper that they give to the service members, it's pretty dark times.
Good old one ply, baby. Government issue.
Man.
Well, we had
I do not miss that.
I tell you what, I had one. I'm not going to mention names. I refuse to. But I had one student who said that his grandmother, and he actually showed me a picture of this from her garage, had bought over $1,000 worth of toilet paper, and this was last year. And it was right there. It was right before we got out for school. He's like, V, you're not going to believe this. And he told me, I was like, no, she didn't. And he showed me. It looked like a pallet from Sam's. Just like a pallet, and I'm like, why?
Think of the convenience. Oh, I'm out of toilet paper. Let me just go out to the garage and grab it.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah, you could have diarrhea for 3 years straight and never have to worry.
Oh, heck yeah. Your Christmas shopping can be done. Just go get you a roll of toilet paper. Merry Christmas.
There you go.
You know?
So I think we all agree what we should do immediately following this. Let's go to the local Walmart, buy at least one pallet, and just stock up. Let's just do it.
Just historically speaking, you guys do know that this happened once before in 1978. Johnny Carson, for those of you who don't know who Johnny Carson was, he was the Tonight Show before it was Jimmy Fallon and Jay Leno. He had made this joke about, it was like, I forgot what it was. We were going through some crisis with some country, and he made up this story. It was a joke about people going out and, buying up toilet paper. And after that show, there was a nationwide shortage of toilet paper, and Johnny Carson took full responsibility for it. No lie. Look it up. I mean, look it up on Google. Google it. I didn't know about it till my wife told me about it last year, and I was like, how come I don't remember this? And then we Googled the clip, and it was I never heard of it before. So
that's like War of the Worlds, but just for ass paper. I love it.
So it reminds me when I see people putting gas in plastic bags and the toilet paper and all of that, it reminds me of that scene in Men in Black where Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith are talking, and Will Smith says to Tommy Lee Jones, why don't you just tell people that we live among aliens? And he said people are smart. And Tommy Lee Jones says, no, a person is smart. People are dumb. And I think about that when I see someone doing something like that. Well, a person is smart, but people can get into this herd mentality where we just panic as a collective, and critical thought goes out the window.
That's just it. There's no critical. Hence the point of Voice of Reason podcast, and we're educating people.
Well, also it reminds me of like whenever there's like a big snowstorm, and I would always hear it from my mom. Make sure you have milk, bread, and eggs. Milk, bread, and eggs. And here's the thing: what sucks is like I eat milk, bread, and eggs pretty regularly, and they're not hard to come by. They're always on the shelves because this is 2021 America, and it's harder like to find zebra cakes on the shelves or a bunch of other bullshit processed foods. But the second that it starts snowing, people are like, we got to be healthy and get these 3 things that we can live off of for however long we're going to be stuck in the snow. I know. It is extremely frustrating. Extremely.
Oh, by the way, Sean, Reed says that you need to clean it. So I'm sure he meant your butt. So
that's an inside joke there.
Yeah, we're not gonna dive deep into that one, but let's say there's not enough toilet paper in the world to fix the problem that he's discussing. But there's plenty of other problems that are going on in the world right now.
Why don't you go ahead and go and dive? Why don't you go ahead and go to the next one, Sean?
Yeah. So, as many of you guys have seen, there's been a lot of issues in Israel dealing with Palestine. This has been, truthfully, as you guys know, the power of celebrity and the power of influencer is continuously growing. There are a lot of individuals that typically speak on certain subjects just because they think it's trendy. There's not an actual care given to certain individuals. They're just like, I'm an important person with a blue check mark, so it's my time to shine, and I'm going to get the people behind me. And unfortunately, it's leading to a lot of misinformation. This is not new. This is not anything crazy. But unfortunately, it's dealing with a pretty serious situation where there's lives involved. And anytime that, a life is lost, we've talked about this on the podcast before of how desensitized we've become to things. And often even, I was guilty of it myself when I was looking at the deaths from the Palestine-Israeli conflict over the years. And I was like, well, those numbers aren't that high. But in retrospect, it's incredibly high. Yes. So this is a very complex situation. Unfortunately, we don't have all the time in the world to kind of talk about everything that's going on. But for those that don't know, Israel and Palestine have been at each other's throats for a very long time.
1948.
And this dates back, post World War II. Thanks to the British government doing what they thought was giving back, and it's led to conflicts, and it's led to many wars. I say many, but I mean many, a bunch of different skirmishes and events, and a creation of. And I thought this was actually very interesting, and I don't want to get too opinionated on this, but I was reading a New York Times post, which I generally look at New York Times as a pretty evenly balanced kind of publication. They do have their moments, but one thing that really kind of ticked me was their description of Hamas, who Israel believes is a militant organization, which it is not, really kind of threw me for a loop, because the creation of Hamas, which now, whether or not some people want to argue whether it's a terrorist organization or whether it is just a government organization, that is up for people to discuss. But to say that it's not a militant group, it's rather interesting, because it was a government militant group that was created to help take control of territories in Israel. But what has started recently? Okay, why is it getting hot all of a sudden? Okay, from what I have been able to find, tensions have been extremely high naturally. It had eased up a little bit with the Trump administration, when President Trump actually moved a U.S. embassy into
Jerusalem.
Israel, and I in Jerusalem, yes. And I watched several videos. One thing, and I apologize, because I will kind of go back and forth with a lot of things on this topic, but it's very complex. But one thing that I saw that people, mostly Americans that are very opinionated about the situation, whether or not they are completely on one side or the other side, was, let's not forget, these are actual individuals. There are actual people who have feelings, that actually care about what's going on, that live in this area. They're not just people that are on the internet seeing what's going on and having an opinion about it. But there are a lot of individuals that are in their 20s, in their 30s, that the way that they speak, it's really kind of weird, because I listened to a couple Jewish individuals. One was a gal that had actually migrated to Israel from Germany, because even in 2019 she was still the victim of racist remarks and being out and about in Germany about her Jewish heritage. So that's still one issue. But she came to Israel because Israel is there. It's as a collection for the Jewish people, right? And she wanted to be there, and now is torn because she's realizing it's not as safe as she once thought it might be. And that's because of the ongoing conflict between people that are Jewish and people that are Arab, that are trying to share this holy land.
Well, if I could say something here real quick, Sean, when you bring back,
please chime in.
So I mean, if you go back to 1947, when the state of Israel, and like you said, it was kind, just to give people a backstory here, it was kind of a, I don't want to say payback but Britain gave that territory, I guess, to the UN, and then the UN said, okay, here you go, Jews, here is a homeland for you. and I showed this video to my kids. You do a YouTube search. It's a video by Prager. It's called PragerU, and this guy does a lot of history teachers love PragerU because it gives a lot of complex issues into a like a 4 or 5 minute blurb. And basically, how he explained this was, I mean, the Muslims are, like you said, the Muslims say this is our holy land. And the Jewish people say this is our holy land, and both of them kind of have a claim to it. But when you look past in history, there has been a Jewish kingdom in this area 3 separate times in history. Okay, so and the Muslims have, in the times when that they have had, they've never established a former kingdom, but they have some of their holy sites there. And so then basically what happened then after Israel became a state in 1947, you had Egypt, Syria, it was called Transjordan at the time, which is Jordan now, and Lebanon attack Israel, and they withstood the attack. And what ends up coming out of this, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon meet then in, I believe it was in Switzerland, and they issued what they called the 3 no's. There was going to be no peace, no recognition, and I forgot what the 3rd no was. But what it came down to was Israel was able to make peace with Egypt by basically giving them what the area is called the Sinai Peninsula, where the Suez Canal is at, an area that is rich in oil. And so they worked out a deal with Israel. They worked out a peace deal with Jordan, and then they worked out a deal with this group called the Palestine Liberation Organization, which was led by a guy by the name of Yasser Arafat, who passed away, I think, 2005, something like that. And what they gave the Palestinians was this area of the what's called the West Bank, which is basically western territory of Jerusalem or of Jordan, right along the Jordanian border there on the Jordan's West Bank. And then they have what's called the Gaza Strip, which is in the south, would be the southwest corner. Well, and that now you're getting where Israel is now letting Jewish settlers move into these territories. And this is, I think, part of the escalation. Like you said, the other part of it was when Donald Trump moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and basically what that was saying, and Jerusalem is like the Berlin of the 80s. Jerusalem is divided into West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is part of the occupied West Bank, and that is, again, where the flashpoints are at right now. And so, like you said, there is a lot of give and take on these issues and it's really, America is one of Israel's allies, but you want to play peacemaker, but at the same time, like you said, Hamas is not making it easy by doing all these suicide bombings and all this other stuff.
Correct. And that's kind of where a lot of the issues lie. Is there's a lot of, I wouldn't even call it muddy water. There is an issue, the huge issue. And again, what we don't understand here is because we just don't typically see things like this in this fashion. This is a holy war that dates back. Okay, these are people that, regardless of what we might believe here, are very entrenched in their religious beliefs, so much that they believe that this is their land. Okay, and that's where a lot of this conflict has really kind of been boiling in the last couple months, is because of there are homes that have Palestinian home owners where people from Israel are going into their homes and claiming them and kicking individuals out of their homes. So this where this had really kind of started to take a shift where tensions were getting high. From what I have gathered, what I've been able to do the research on, why things are literally blowing up, was just about a month ago, On April 13th, which is the first day of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, there was an incident between Israeli police and Palestinians at a mosque in Jerusalem. From my understanding, it had something to do with there were loudspeakers that were playing. The Israeli police went and physically cut the cords of these loudspeakers because the Israeli president was delivering a speech at the Western Hall, a sacred Jewish site that is below the mosque, and the Israeli officials were concerned that the prayers would be drowned out. The prayers from Ramadan would drown out the speech. So this was confirmed by mosque officials, and then Israeli police were silent on the situation. Now, this turned into small protests, okay, where there were protests against Israeli police, which turned into, we've seen here in the United States, protests can turn violent very, very quickly.
Mostly peaceful.
Yeah.
Yes. And as many of you guys might have seen, there was, what mosque was that? Shortly following, there was that incident at the mosque there where there were like flashbangs going off on the inside, and people were getting shuffled out, which has now led to Hamas just launching rockets into Israel. It's become a very messy situation. Where at this point now, I think the last thing I read, it's something confirmed of the people that have died, I want to say 45 of them were children. It's getting extremely messy, and we are at an awkward time where now it seems as if a building that was occupied by the Associated Press was bombed and destroyed. Now, there had been warnings. There were no individuals from the Associated Press that were injured, which is a very good thing. However, once independent media are attacked, now it becomes a much larger foreign issue. President Biden has been relatively quiet on the issue, which is causing even more stir because now that is agitating the Israeli president. That is agitating. I mean, we have Vladimir Putin is calling for a UN summit in the nations, not our president. It is Putin that is trying to stick his foot out and try to be the ringleader on this and try to, contact nations like France, Germany, and other nations to try to actually come get foreign leaders at a summit to help resolve this issue. And
I think it's
that is very interesting, at least.
I think it's ironic, and I may be reaching at something totally out of left field with this, but we've been in this position as well. If you what you just described to me, Sean, sounds like something we did to a group of people, say, 200 years ago when we forced them off of land that was theirs. At what point, and here's where, and maybe Ed and Travis can kick into this. At what point do we get involved? I mean, do we have the right to get involved? Is this something that, is this one of those situations where, and Travis, this kind of goes back to our discussion last week, is this one of those situations where we sit back and let them hash it out, or is it we're going to let them blow each other to smithereens until there's nothing left? I mean, what do you guys think is the best answer for this?
Matt, I'll let you take this first.
Yeah, so I appreciate Sean's comment that, there are real people in this conflict who are dying, who are traumatized and will forever be. Speaking from my own experience of just growing up in Iowa, in a conservative evangelical family, all I heard essentially were pro-Israeli things. We're pro-Israel and all of that. And then, as I've grown up and kind of been able to look more on either side, you realize this conflict has a lengthy history. Both sides have done atrocities to each other and continue to do so. It's all ugly, right? And, I work closely with a Palestinian doctor here in Louisville who, he doesn't say an awful lot publicly, but he talks to me some about, what's going on. And he's visibly upset. And he has, of course, friends and family that are directly being impacted. And so, it's tough. And I think it's a good exercise, no matter where you find yourself on this issue or any other issue, to look into the eyes of someone and hear their experience, especially when you're not familiar with their experience. Like I'm with this doctor, I'm learning so much about his perspective, and I may not agree with the politics of that side, but I can certainly see his pain and know that's real. And so I think that any kind of reaction to this has to take into account, like this is lengthy, in atrocities on both sides. I think, Andy, you bring up a good thing about, we've done this before, we've seen this before. It's kind of like, online, I had read someone who posed a question, well, who owns Israel, right? Who owns the West Bank? Who owns Gaza? And the question was put back on the person and said, well, who owns America? Do we own America, or is it the Native Americans who were here before us? And you could go through almost every country and say the same thing. Australia, who owns Australia, right? Is it the Aboriginal culture that were there before Western civilization came in? And so you can kick this can down the road, and it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly. The answer is not. It's not easy to come to.
Right.
Yeah.
Travis, what do you think?
He made a really good. I mean, I think we all agree. We kind of touched on this last episode about the, desensitization. I butchered that word, but you know what I'm saying, of like just human life being lost. And I'm not informed enough on this entire situation to really give my perspective on who I think, because we don't know, like who does Israel belong to? This issue dates back so far, and there's been, and it's he made a really good point, Matt, about there's been atrocities on both sides, so you got to acknowledge that, and then you ask, okay, so who do we support? Do we support Israel? Because have they really been the good guys in this whole situation? I mean, if you look at the history of everything, I mean, yeah, you brought up a good point too about we were raised to believe that, pro-Israel, if you come from that background. And again, it's just, this is a really complex situation.
And if you come,
looking at the videos I saw, you see those C-rams firing off of those missiles up in the air. That's not a pretty sight to see.
No.
Well, and if you come from the generation that Matt and I come from, we were raised, I don't know if Matt remembers this or not, but we were raised in time of before they flew airplanes into buildings, to see a terrorist take over a plane and hold hostages or blow up a plane. I still remember back in the 80s, it was Pan Am Flight 103 that was shot down it was a missile or a bomb on board over Lockerbie, Scotland. And Libya, the Muslim Libyan organization took credit for it. And I remember the very next day Reagan going over there and bombing the holy hell out of Tripoli, and just stuff like that. And what really, it's amazing, and I could probably draw a little bit from Matt's theological side here, but when you say, okay, if you were to sit down a Muslim and a Jew and say, okay, who do you trace your heritage back to? Well, our father was Abraham. Okay, well, no, and they're both right. If you trace back to the Jewish faith, and they can go all the way back to Isaac, okay, and the Muslims can go all the way back to Ishmael. Ishmael was basically forced out into the desert with his mother, and those people became the Bedouins, who would later become, nomadic traders, who Muhammad was one of those people, and then you go from Isaac's side and the people who were given the quote unquote promised land, which was the land beyond, the river, and so they both have. I mean, it's one of those things. I don't think that it's truly cut and dried where you can say, "Hey, it's Israel," or "No, it's the Muslims." It's they both have a heritage. They both have a connection to this land, and this isn't. I don't think this is going to be one of those problems that are going to be solved at the end of the day with somebody being happy.
I'm just curious what the U.S. response is going to be. I mean, Sean's right. I mean, our president's been really quiet about it, I think, and I don't really know how I feel about that yet. I just don't know what we do. I don't know what the answer is. Thank God I'm not the one paid to make those decisions.
Well, it's kind of weird.
There's a lot to this.
It's when we've went from a megaphone mouth to a deaf mute in the White House. So I mean, it's kind of hard to have the balance between both of them.
And when I look at situations like this particularly, it makes me think of a lot about kind of religion as a whole. Like, we go back and really wanted to dive deep into like some certain things of it. It's one of those unfortunate truths where, even myself as a religious individual, we look at a lot of the conflicts and horrors throughout history, and oftentimes sometimes it comes down to the disagreement about religion. Look at like the Crusades, and just think like when I look at the Crusades, I think of that was how the Holy War was fought at the time. But I think of, what if the ideology that was had during the Crusades happened in today's time with the technology and the weapons that we have today? It would not be very good at all. And so when here in the States, when we have luxuries, like we had protests and things got messy, but we don't have, thankfully, we're at a point right now where Republicans, Democrats are not bombing one another. But whenever I often hear a lot of people talk of like, that's a mess in the Middle East, and that's Muslims for you, and whatever they might say. But it's like, look at some of the other incidents that we have here in America. Like, look at like Jim Jones in Jonestown, right? Didn't blow anything up, but 900 people died because of religion, because of a cult religion following. So to say like it's just one side or the other side, like, people go crazy and passionate and do crazy things because of their beliefs. Like, this is not new, and it's just weird. 2021 is a weird time for a holy war to really start to light the fire and get going again, because you look at what we talked about on the podcast not too long ago, was Lil Nas X giving the lap dance to the devil. It's just funny times we live in, my friends.
Well, I guess we could make the greatest transition in the world from that to our last topic of the evening.
Well, the greatest transition that ever happened in the world was Bruce to Caitlyn Jenner. I don't want you to forget it.
I teed that up for him, and he just knocked it right out of the park. Thank you, Sean. No,
thank you.
Yeah,
I just knew you were going to say
I knew he was, and I was like, as soon as that came out of my mouth. So, no. One of the things, and this is one of the reasons why we have Matt and I have had many a discussion over this, but I have the talk right now, of course. The talk right now is, of course, whether or not to raise minimum wage. Minimum wage has not risen since 2009. I actually went to the Congressional Budget Office's website, and these guys are supposed to give the straight. I got And by the way, thank you to all. I actually have printed out right here just to show. I've got printed out of all the comments, and we got tons of text and everything this week. You guys won't be able to see it, but I'll put up the poll here real quick. We put up a poll this week, and it says, "Do you think minimum wage should be raised?" You guys will see it here if you guys are watching on the feed. We had over 150 responses. 79% said no, 21% said yes. And so, Matt had brought up a point to me in one of our discussions, one of our hundreds of discussions about, okay, so does minimum wage, I can't remember exactly how you said it, Ed, just jump in any time, but the buying power, is it closely related? And and now as I've done some research, and I'm reading, and this was a 15-page report that I read from the Congressional Budget Office, and the Congressional Budget Office puts out worst case scenario either way. And what they were saying was, and I found this to be and this was a point that Matt had actually said to me, I think we brought up something like this: minimum wage stop meeting cost of living increases. I'll let you guys guess. When do you think the last time minimum wage met cost of living increases? What year? Give me just...
It would have been like the 90s or something, wouldn't it have been? Maybe.
Was it
like 80s,
earlier
90s?
or later? Earlier or later?
Earlier.
I'm going to say 19, whenever we went from the gold standard. That's my guess.
You're very close. You are very close. 1968. 1968, and I was quite surprised by that. And this was, so here's the, so basically, and there are people who have said both ways. I'll just go ahead and go with the argument that minimum, this is the argument that I kind of tend to lean towards. And this is where, and Matt, please jump in at any time. But this was, my source for this was Investopedia, I believe is what it is. Yeah, Investopedia. And they're kind of a think tank. And it says, raising the minimum wage has been attacked on at least two fronts. First, economists argue that such a minimum creates an artificial floor in the labor market, which can cause distortions and inefficiency. The rationale is that a free market for labor someday may be willing to work a job for, say, $10 per hour, but since government mandates say at least $15 per hour, that workers cannot competitive bid lower for the job. The second argument is that employers forced to pay more in wages will end up hiring fewer workers, which will actually lead to higher unemployment as those workers are unable to be hired. And so with regard, and this is something from my college days. So basically what you have then is this is called wage push inflation. And according to this, in order to maintain corporate profits after an increase in wages, employers must increase the prices they charge for goods and services they provide. That's the one side. And then when you go to the other side says, according to a recent piece of economic research that examined the effect of prices on minimum wage increases in various states in the United States from 1978 to 2015, they found that a 10% increase in minimum wage only accounts for about 0.36% increase in prices, which kind of surprised me. But I don't know. What I've been taught and what I've been raised to believe, I guess, but of course, Matt and I went to a very, 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 very conservative college that, that their talk is, okay, you raise minimum wage, you're going to see a raise in prices. And Matt, what was your argument that you were kind of saying to me about that?
Well, for me, it's more of a human rights issue, right? Like, I get into this with my father-in-law, who is a pretty right-wing Republican person, right? And we're on opposite ends of that spectrum. And he will say to me, well, how much is the person that's flipping burgers, like that skill? How much is that worth, right? And so that's where he comes at this from. for me, it's a human rights issue. If we live in this country and we say that this is the land of opportunity, but then you give someone a wage who at $7.25 an hour, making less than $15,000 a year, that person has no power, right? People who have power are the wealthy people. And so someone who's working for $7.25, maybe they have a family, maybe they have other things, they have no power to make their lives better, right? I know we want to say, well, you could go to school and you can do all these other things, right? And that's not possible for a lot of people, right? College is expensive. Trade schools are expensive. If you've got a kid or two or a house, or you're just buying groceries, your purchasing power is far less than it was even 10 years ago. And so I really advocate for this $15 minimum wage, just as a human rights issue. I've seen also the studies that say, if you increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour, that raises 1 million people up out of poverty directly. It also affects about another 17 million people indirectly, and actually will reduce the number of people on government assistance.
That is actually, just to back you up on that, Matt, that is exactly what the committee on, or the Congressional Budget Office, that's what they're saying as well.
Yeah. And by the way, I was just thinking about you reading that 17-page report from the Congressional Budget Office, and I was just thinking, I bet Janine finds you about the sexiest man alive when you're reading that kind of stuff. And I was getting a little hot under the collar just thinking about the CBO myself.
Thank you very much. Yes,
I'm gonna need a moment.
Yes. I have some eyes for you, but. But yes,
I'll be out walking parapet.
Now that is a joke that Matt and I have with each other, Sean. Yes, shaking hands with the Wookiee. But we actually have a comment from I don't know if Ed remembers Greg Ridenhour or not, but he says, I can remember working my first job in 1986 for $3.35 an hour. I actually, one of my friends who works in the union, he actually asked me to, he actually listens to the pod. He goes to work at 4:00 in the morning. So he actually texted me, some stuff, and he wanted me to make sure that I read this, and you guys can react to this how if you want to. But he's a union carpenter, works down in Wentzville. He drives from Pittsfield down to Wentzville. And he says, so if they raise minimum wage up to $15 like they want, and carpenter starting pay is $14.75, what jobs are kids going to pick? The one inside, put out of the weather, or the more physically demanding trade job? This is where we, and he says we, as in the carpenters union, will lose our trade jobs anywhere they raise it. And he said, definitely no. And then he goes on to say, that it's the general consensus of what I'm saying, that if these kids are willing to take minimum wage jobs out of high school, who's going to build buildings, fix roads, or repair houses when the older generation retires? And I see that aspect of it too, because when I look at, and now I'm going to go to the right side of this. So as someone who, and my first job. And please don't take this the wrong way, Sean, but I actually worked as a stripper too, but it was actually in an antique shop. I stripped furniture, but just get that visual out of your head. But I worked in an antique shop at age 15, and I made $3.50 an hour. And everybody has that story of the first job that they had, and so and we all worked. I mean, I can tell you that my parents gave me nothing. I mean, my dad was a Baptist minister and a church planter at that, and I got more money from Pell Grants than I did anything else, and I did take out my wife took out a sizable college loan that we just paid off a few years ago. I mean, and this is where I see the struggle coming down, is between the older generation and the younger generation. I mean, you have the older generation that says, okay, we're going to work we're going to work at this and say, well, we went through all of this and we worked our way through this. So why can't you kids do this? And why can't you kids work through this? And I don't want to sound like,
but I think that's a myth. Don't you think that's a myth? I mean, because even if you look at, the generation that went through the Great Depression, right? They had huge governmental help. I mean, it wasn't just them by themselves. They were poor as heck because the economy and the policymakers in Washington helped to drive this economic depression. So, I mean, I think it's a little bit of a romanticized revisionist history to look back and say that, well, we did this. Government exists to secure the safety and the prosperity of its citizens. Mm-hmm. That's what it ought to be doing. And I think in our American culture, it's often romanticized, this whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Some people have no bootstraps.
So do you think that it's one of these things though where, I mean, we're seeing enough. Let me back up and say it this way: we're seeing enough separation now between that generation and, I mean, my father. I don't. Was your dad alive during Depression, Matt? Was he part of that generation?
No, he was born in 1945.
Okay,
so it'd be a little bit after.
Yeah. So my dad was born. My dad was born in 1934. So he was born right in the heart of it. And he talks a lot. Of course, my dad was part of that group that was called the Forgotten Man, which was the farmers. They got the AAA money, but they didn't get, but my grandfather on my mom's dad worked for the WPA. And so I look at what minimum wage from a historical standpoint, what minimum wage was designed to do, because we came from a time where you had the big businessmen. One of the books that I have my kids read during the year is The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, and he talks about how the meatpacking industry in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and then all the crooked Chicago political machines, and how they were all working together and paying people, a quarter a day, and kids 10 cents a day, and there was in a time when there was no minimum wage. And I look at that situation and I say, yes, so there needed to be some government regulation to come in and say, all right, we're going to make it to where here's your flat rate. You have to pay at least this. Okay. Now, that was again in, like you said, 1930s, 1940s. And I think that now since then we have become more specialized. We have more specialized industry. We have more people who can say, okay, I can go work, as my friend said here, I can go work as a building framer, and I can start as a journeyman at $14.75 an hour, $15 an hour. But now when we say, okay, when you yes, you're going to raise people up from poverty. I do agree with that. You'll raise some people up from poverty, but then you look around. Then there's the rest of the people who have went to college, who have gotten their degree, who have gotten, I've spent close to $25,000 and that was 1990s money, but to pay for a college education. And what I hope to gain from that was a higher paying wage than minimum wage. Now that makes me out. But then again, that makes me have to look like a jerk because, okay, I deserve this because I went to college more, or do I deserve more than the guy who didn't go to college? And again, this makes me sound like a jerk, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. It's because of the choices that I've made as an individual that I'm going to say, okay, I choose to go into profession. Now, granted, teaching isn't a big time paying job, but at the same time, I'm going to make more than minimum wage, in what I do. So, I mean, that there's just, to me, there's no, and again, to me, there's no cut and dried way to look at it. I don't know, Travis, what's your thoughts on this?
I want to make one comment on the guy, friend of yours who worked carpenter union. You said? Yes. From what I've seen in the construction field versus your typical job at McDonald's or Whole Foods or something of the sort, I can speak from my experience. If we're saying minimum wage is at 15, I'm not making much more than that. However, if I stay in this industry and learn more, within 2 to 3 years, I'm going to be making significantly more money. And I think that goes back to people have a little bit more patience in your field. You're not going to start out making foreman money. Like, you got to learn the job to get paid for the skills required. Just speaking from the construction standpoint, like, you got to do your time and learn the job to make more money and make a career. You don't do construction. The construction's a career, like whatever it is. I view it as a career. And you got to do your time with that. And the whole minimum wage issue in general, I was actually thinking about this today. You know, whether we agree with it or not, I think we're getting to a point where we don't really necessarily have a choice. Matt, you made a point about the human rights issue. And I'm going to agree with you on that because we're facing inflation right now, whether people want to admit it or not. I think it's a real issue. And we're going to have to get to a point where, you know, $7.25 an hour is worthless. Prices are going up whether we like it or not. And what do you do? People are getting paid more to be on unemployment. So what do? Do you just leave them on unemployment, or do we raise the wages to help the inflation issue and get people back into the workforce? I mean, I think we're at a point where there has to be an incentive to work again. Well, I was reading, I subscribed to this newsletter talking about the markets and stuff, and Taco Bell just did they're doing like a hiring party at certain locations where they're literally having people come in, starting out $15 an hour and trying to get them in with full benefits and a bunch of other stuff. And it's just there. I think we're at a point where it's just not necessarily a choice anymore.
Well, we did have
inflation.
We did have one of our listeners just commented, and he said, "Bingo! Why work a job for $16, $17 an hour when you can flip burgers for 15?" And again, you know, and you mentioned Taco Bell. So when I get to drive Uber and Lyft, I get a variety of different customers in my car. And I remember during COVID, I drove a lot during COVID last year, and I drove this one gentleman to Chick-fil-A. He worked for Chick-fil-A, and I took him in and I said, "So, what's it like working for Chick-fil-A?" He said, "Honestly," he said, and this guy I'd say was probably in his 20s. He said, "It's the best job I've ever had." I said, "Well, okay." I said, "What's so good about it?" He said, "Well, first of all," he said, "once every economic quarter, our bosses either have they have an employee appreciation day where they bring in these 5-star chefs and they cook for us, and then we get a profit sharing bonus, and I was like, this is Chick-fil-A doing this, you know." And he's like, you know, he said, you know, if you would have told me 5 years ago I'd be making a career out of working at Chick-fil-A. And he said, and they give us all opportunities for upward mobility through the company, you know. And so when you look at that, you say, okay, so there are those companies who are doing it right, but you know, I look at to me, and again, going back the other way, I look at the corporate devil. To me, the corporate devil is Walmart, even though I probably spend more money there than I ought to. I mean, they purposely keep their guys below 40 hours a week so they don't have to pay them insurance. They don't have to give them, you know, and and then I'm sorry, guys, I'm one of the weirdos who doesn't use the self-checkout, because I'm like, okay, I'm taking away jobs from somebody because, you know, and so, I mean, there's just so many different sides to this that I mean, I can see both sides.
To talk about the corporate thing, I worked at Whole Foods for a couple months, and I was a part-time worker who got none of the benefits, and yet I worked 40 hours a week. Most of the employees at that specific location were part-time, and some of us were doing overtime during the holidays, but you know, we weren't full-time employees, so we didn't get the benefits, which
We do have another listener who said, so if you pay someone $15 flipping burgers, that value meal price goes up because the company is going to have to more cost. So in the end, inflation goes up, and yes, we are making more money, but putting more out. I think eventually it all equals out in the end, and we're back to the same situation. And in that
I think the price goes up regardless.
right? And
yeah, prices go up regardless.
well, see, and that's just it. So you have what's called, and that's the other side of it. So you have wage push inflation, and you have market push inflation. So it's two sides to the inflation coin. Market push inflation is basically because of some aspect of the market driving the prices up. When we first saw gas hikes back in, what was that, 2008, 10, somewhere in that area, and we really, so you saw because and that was a trickle down from OPEC cutting back on the supply of oil that they were putting out there, and then so everybody had to. I mean, I remember this sounds silly, but I still remember this. My garbage for every 3 months went from $45 up to $75. And I still remember that because to me that was a great example because those guys are like, hey, we're burning the same amount of diesel, it's just costing us that much more to, and so that's what you call a market push inflation, and according to, and again, this was something out of the budget office, we've seen more market push inflation than we have seen wage push inflation. I think the actual percentage that they actually said was I think I said earlier was like 0.38% since 1968 of the inflation. 0.38% of that has been wage push inflation. So, I mean, I honestly have had my eyes open doing. I could, like I said, I've got just pages of stuff that I poured through today just to look through this, and I was kind of, it was enlightening at some point to look at this, but it's easy for everybody else to say, just, should corporate take one for the team? And that's the question I'll throw out to you guys too. Should corporate America take one for the team? Because most of these business get in for what we call the profit motive. Capitalism is based upon profit motive, making money for, you go all the way back to Ray Kroc. When he started McDonald's, actually, he stole the idea from McDonald's. That's a totally different story. But when when Ray Kroc, he saw an opportunity to create a business where people could get a burger for 15 cents and he could make a good profit off of it. And then, from that time, then we've seen these guys make profit. We see Walmart. Walmart's always about the bottom line, making, selling low cost crap, and then paying their workers low wages, and so do you guys think that corporate America needs to take one for the team?
I had seen on the news Senator Josh Hawley? Is he from Missouri?
Yeah, yes.
Hawley, yeah.
Yeah, and he's not at all one of my favorites, but I know that he had proposed an idea that if you are a corporation or a company that make over $1 billion a year, that he would mandate that they pay at least $15 an hour, with the assumption that if you're making that kind of money, you can afford to pay your employees $15 an hour. To me, I think there's a huge corporate responsibility because we have to remember that many of these corporations are not paying anywhere close to their fair share in taxes. And and sometimes that's for good reason. You want to attract businesses and things like that. But Andy, I think you're right. In my mind, also the corporate evil is Walmart. And if you look at how much they make and how little they actually pay,
compared to
they pay,
right,
they're such a low wage is inexcusable.
Well, and when you compare them to Target, to Kohl's, Target has come out publicly and said that they're all for paying their workers $15 an hour. I don't know. To me, this is a never-ending wormhole that will go on forever. And part of me says, okay, there are other jobs that are available that pay, that that pay better wages than McDonald's. And I mean, should you aim higher? Should you? I mean, but like you said, there's some people, Matt, who live in downtown Louisville who have no access to that education, or who have access to an opportunity. So it's easy for me to sit here in soft, cushy, town of 3,500 where neighbor helps out neighbor, whereas in the concrete jungles of the inner city, they don't have that opportunity. And one of our other listeners here said, sadly, the prices have been going up consistently, even with minimum wage not raising. And that was another one of our former students, and he and I had a conversation about that this week too. So,
yeah, I think that, I mean, at the hospital I work at, it's right at the corner is a bus stop, and so many of our environmental services people, our housekeepers, ride that bus. And so, when people say, well, there are other jobs out there, well, if you're dependent on public transportation, you're really limited on the jobs that are accessible to you. You're not going to get that construction job and that new housing development on the edge of town, because the buses don't run out that way. And even if they did, they don't run out that way at 6 in the morning when you've got to be out there on the job site.
right.
And I want to talk a little bit about, Dylan Butler talked about why work a physical job for $16, $17 an hour when you can flip burgers for 15. So I think what Mr. Butler is getting at here is a supply and demand argument, that if I'm supplying a $15 flipping burger job, why would you demand the $16, $17 an hour construction job? And I think he has a point there, but supply and demand works not only for consumers, but for companies. So if you have that construction job that has that physical aspect to it, and you demand employees to help you, build houses or what have you, then yeah, as a company, you're probably going to have to pay more than $16 or $17 an hour, because you're going to have to attract people who, like Mr. Butler here, would say, well, why do that when I can do this other thing for just a little bit less? You're going to attract people to say, well, I'm not going to flip burgers for $15 an hour. I will go and do that physical job because it pays $20 an hour or $21 an hour. And that's on corporations to decide what they will pay.
One thing that and Travis can speak for this, and you guys might be able to as well. One thing that always gets me with this argument, and it seems to be the first thing I always hear, is people talking about what is the value of flipping a burger. I've worked in the service industry for a long time. I love the service industry. I love working with food, whether it's behind a bar, whether it's as a server, as a manager, or as a line cook. It's almost insulting to those that have actually been in a kitchen and know what kind of demand is needed for those that work back there. Let me tell you something. It's not an easy job. And here's the thing that gets me. Look at the demand of a place like McDonald's versus the demand of a place like a construction company. Sure, a construction company is going to be very busy. Let's talk, like, even if it's like a smaller, more local one, those construction jobs will come and those individuals will be busy. I've worked many manual labor jobs, and I've worked more deskish jobs, and I've worked kitchen jobs. And let me tell you something. Kitchen jobs are just as physically demanding as any other labor job, even basic training as a soldier. Some of the crap that I had to do at basic training was nothing like the stress of a super expensive wedding, of a crazy dinner rush at 6 p.m. when there's 4 people in the kitchen and there's 200 people wanting a meal. That's what, like, when you, okay, why should he get paid $15 an hour to flip a burger? Well, guess what? Because there's a line of 50 cars at 3 in the morning, and there's 2 people in the back of that kitchen, and you all are drunk. And not only do they have to deal with your bullshit at the microphone when you can't even get through with your order completely, and then all, like, that's the thing is people, they part of the issue is when it comes to things like McDonald's, Taco Bell, right? Those are typically the ones we always hear. You flipping burgers, you do, like it's not a very, there's not a whole lot that goes into that. And then you look at like, okay, well, yeah, maybe because they're paid so crappily, not a lot of people that really want to work might be taking those jobs, right? You might have individuals that don't want to work, and that's why the product comes out so shitty. When I went to Poland, the McDonald's in Poland was at the mall was the best McDonald's I have ever been to. It was the cleanest. When I say, like, when you look at a McDonald's commercial and you open up like the wrapper, that burger looks like what you would see on the commercial when you get it. I asked our translator in Poland, I said, why are McDonald's so nice? Why are they so clean? And he told me, he said, well, people in Poland don't have a lot of money, so they will not spend money on a product that is not worth it. You look at how, and so, for example, the same individual, college was free at the time. I'm not sure if it still is, but at the time, he had his master's. He was, I lied. He went to law school. He was a lawyer. But he took a job as a manager at what would be considered a Foot Locker, because of the way that tax brackets were set up. What he would have made as a lawyer after taxes would have bumped him down to where after what he would have made at taxes as a manager at like a Foot Locker was only about a $2,000 difference. So he said, why would I deal with the stress and the work of being a lawyer when I could just take a small pay cut and be a shoe store manager?
And that's where my argument's at, though. Okay, so let's answer that question real quick. And again, I'm going to seem like the douchebag in the room, but I'll take the role. It's okay. I think that shut up, Matt. If I look at
Go ahead.
If I look at this though I'll rewind to 1997 when I took my first teaching job at Bloomfield, Missouri. My starting salary was $21,000 a year. Now again, that's in 1997 money, but I had students who were working for Tyson Chicken, and they were working for a contractor who. Now, it was a crappy job, but they went in and they were chicken catchers, and that's a terrible job, by the way. But the dude he would leave school at 3:30. He would work the 4 to midnight shift, and he was bringing home more than what I was in my position as a teacher. And I'm like, well, then my point is, what's the point in going and getting a degree then? I mean, at some point, if we say we're going to pay those with, and again, I'm not saying but it's going to come out sounding douchey, but why pay those people who do a job that requires minimal training a higher living wage than those of us who went and if you want to look at it this way, wasted our money on a degree or a master's degree. I mean, I have my master's in education, and it's taken me a while to get to where I'm at now, what the money I'm making now. I mean, it's taken me 25 years to make it to where I'm finally at a point where I can say, okay, I'm living somewhat comfortably. I still have my bills to pay. I still have, I'm not rolling around in a Cadillac Escalade by any means, but at the same time, I make wise enough choices to say, okay, I'm going to spend money on what I know I can afford. I'm going to, and I understand that though, with people who are working 2 and 3 jobs, it's hard for them to do, and I get that, So, I mean, there's just so many different ways to look at this, and I'm not saying I don't have sympathy for those people, because I have friends who work 3 jobs who are trying to make ends meet, and they don't have the opportunity that Matt was talking about earlier about getting an education. They just don't have access to that. And so, I mean, sadly, I don't have a solution that I can offer that says, hey, this is going to be the fix-all of fix-alls.
Well, two small things I wanted to chirp in. One thing that Matt said earlier that resonated with me, because it's a huge issue here in the United States, is the lack of an effective and inexpensive public transportation system in America is killer. I know like big cities like New York, Chicago, California, they have more means to public transportation, but look at the state that a lot of them are in. I mean, the infrastructure is literally crumbling and there's not money being funneled back into the infrastructure to fix. Like, go anywhere else in the world and look at public transportation. It's almost weird that people like when they talk about like Americans, like, why does every American have to have a car? Like, why do you have to have a car? And we're like, well, because like the ideology of taking the bus sucks is like ingrained into a lot of Americans, like that it should, like, it's embarrassing, and it's really not. But we've gotten to that point where public transportation is almost like looked down upon, like if you use it regularly in some instances, and it's actually kind of expensive in comparison to other places I've been. Like, public transportation can cost quite a bit. Even like day passes or season passes can get really, really expensive, especially for someone who might be struggling along and is, you know, trying to just get to work, but it's hard to shell out, you know, cash for a bus pass. But when it kind of comes to the education thing, and I know this is like a little bit off topic, different kind of topic than inflation of minimum wage, but when I look at like the argument of should college be free, or, you know, all that stuff, or, you know, repay student loan debt, it's one of those things. Like in the military, we have like what's called a low density list, where if you score high enough on a test and you take a job that is needed, you can actually get more money. That's a potential thing we have. We give bonus money to individuals like that. So I love, like, the argument I always hear is, you know, I shouldn't have to pay for your liberal arts, feminist, you know, underwater basket weaving, you know, degree. And while I agree we shouldn't just be paying for any kind of degree, I think it would be nice if the United States had more of an incentive, or some kind of, whether it's a state regulated or federally regulated program, that would actually offer like, hey, these are some jobs that we need that are high paying, whether they're in tech, whether they're in the med field, where we can kind of boost individuals to, like, you know, go after and get that kind of school. We all know teachers are underpaid, which is ridiculous, because teachers, what people seem to forget is teachers are not just teachers in today's society. They're a lot of people's parents too. And so there's a whole bunch of a mess, but I see and I understand completely where it's frustrating, where if minimum wage was to go up, then it's like, well, what about some, you know, individuals that are on like salary, or, you know, now it becomes, now there is muddy water of, okay, this is a college educated individual who became a teacher, and now they're making less money than the high school student that they're teaching, you know, who works 30 hours a week after school at Walmart. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more, you know, discussion that needs to go into it. That's like, okay, well, maybe our teachers underpaid, are all these other positions, our police, our firefighters, are these individuals underpaid, if all of a sudden we take, you know, anyone off the street can go and start to make more money than someone that had to invest in their education. It's just a big old clump, and I will stand by it. The legalization of marijuana will fix all problems. But unfortunately, that will not happen today.
No. Thank you. Yep. I think it's a good spot for us to end on. I don't want to end on it, but yeah.
We could definitely revisit this topic 120 times, and I definitely would love to have Matt on again soon, definitely to help dive deeper. But yeah, to all of our listeners, thank you guys so much for giving us a listen this evening. I know there was a bit of rambling and jumping back and forth tonight, but this is definitely one of those topics that, again, you know, it could be had around a campfire and it would last all night long, just, you know, throwing that discussion out there. So, gentlemen, is there anything that any of you guys would like to add before we wrap things up here tonight?
Thank you, Matt, for staying up past your bedtime. I know it's 11:30 there on the East Coast, but you know, be sure.
You know, I'm often out till 2 a.m. just making it happen. You know what I mean? I'm just out there. You know,
be sure
the ladies hear that I'm a chaplain, they just come in, just droves. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You don't know because you're not. But I mean.
Hey, he's got that Joel Osteen kind of money.
That's true. No, seriously. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to join you all. I love the podcast. Be glad to join you all anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. We appreciate it, pal.
Awesome. Thank you. And again, for those that are listening, please feel free to listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, right here on Facebook and our YouTube page, The Voice of Reason Podcast 2021. Thank you all so much, and we cannot wait to talk to you guys next week.
See you guys.